The last thing Jake saw before the teleporter beam caught him was High Chancellor Z's tentacles face-palming in perfect unison, and the barely contain order. I will have order in this council. High Chancellor Z's tentacles rippled with indignation as he slammed his ceremonial gravity hammer against the floating podium. The sound echoed through the vast chamber of the Galactic Council of Prudent Species, bouncing off crystalline walls and causing several of the more gelatinous council members to wobble nervously. Jake Martinez, currently being restrained by two very large and very annoyed Cranaxian security guards, flashed his most winning smile. "Hey Zippy, you might want to ease up on that hammer. Pretty sure that podium's still under warranty. You will address me as High Chancellor Zzz." The council leader's epidermis flushed a deep shade of purple, which clashed terribly with his formal ceremonial robes. "Those are some fancy jammies you've got on there, Your Honor." Jake nodded appreciatively at the shimmering garment. "Is that space polyester? Really brings out the purple in your everything." One of the Cranaxian guards tightened their grip, and Jake felt his handcuffs pinch. Worth it, though. He'd gotten at least 3 of the junior council members to snicker before they caught themselves. High Chancellor Z's eye stalks quivered as he consulted the holographic document floating before him. "Jake the Menace Martinez, you stand accused of multiple charges against the peace and dignity of the Galactic Federation. Guilty of having a good time, Your Honor." Jake winked at a reptilian council member who quickly looked away but couldn't quite hide their amused tail twitch. Silence. Z's tentacles were practically tying themselves in knots now. "The charges are as follows: 27 counts of winning bar fights against protected species. In my defense, they started it, every single time. 43 counts of teaching inappropriate human sayings to impressionable aliens. Pull my finger is a cultural touchstone where I come from. And most seriously," Z's voice dropped to a horrified whisper, deliberately introducing the concept of dad jokes to the newly spacefaring xylophone civilization. A collective gasp went up from the assembled council. Several members covered their sensory organs. One particularly sensitive methane breather had to be escorted out. "Now that's just not fair," Jake protested. "They loved those jokes. Did you know the xylophones actually vibrate when they laugh? It's like a one-man band having a seizure. Hilarious." The xylophone civilization has reported a 47% drop in productivity due to their population being unable to stop repeating the phrase, "Hi, hungry, I'm dad." Z's eye stalks narrowed. Their entire economy is in danger of collapse. "See, I'm promoting work-life balance. You should be thanking me." The High Chancellor's podium drifted closer, looming over Jake. "We are a council of prudent species, Mr. Martinez." "Prudent. Do you know what that word means? Is this a setup for another joke? Because I've got a great one about a prudent walks into a bar. It means," Zaz interrupted, "that we have survived and thrived in this galaxy by being careful, measured, and above all, serious about our actions and their consequences." Jake couldn't help himself. "Sounds boring." "And you, Mr. Martinez, are anything but boring. You are chaos incarnate, a walking disruption to the natural order. The council has deliberated long and hard about how to deal with you. Or you guys talk about me when I'm not around? I'm touched." High Chancellor Z's drew himself up to his full height, tentacles spread wide in what was probably supposed to be an intimidating display. "Jake the Menace Martinez, this council hereby sentences you to permanent exile on Tartarus 9, the planet of 1,000 deaths." The chamber fell silent. Even Jake raised an eyebrow. "Tartarus 9, isn't that a bit excessive? I mean, the xylophones really did enjoy those jokes." "The sentence is final," Z's declared with obvious satisfaction. "You will be permitted 3 items of your choosing, then transported immediately. Let your fate serve as an example to others who would disturb the prudent order of our galaxy." Jake glanced around the chamber, taking in the serious faces, the elaborate robes, the floating podiums, and the general air of self-importance. He grinned. "Hey, Zippy, one last question before I go." Zix sighed. "What is it, human? What do you call a planet with 1,000 deaths?" "I will not." A grave situation. D. Snickers of the junior council members. The processing center for condemned criminals was exactly as cheerful as Jake expected, which was to say, not at all. The walls were a shade of grey that somehow managed to be both boring and depressing, and the lighting gave everything an unflattering greenish tint that made even the Chronaxian guards look slightly nauseous. Prisoner will now select 3 items for exile, droned the bureaucrat behind the desk, a thin creature that appeared to be made primarily of paperwork and disapproval. Its name tag read, Processing Officer P. Twerp. Jake brightened. Only 3? Are you sure you don't want to make it more challenging? 2 items? 1? Maybe just send me naked. 3 items, Patwerp interrupted, antennae twitching with irritation. Standard exile protocol as established by subsection 7, paragraph 4 of the all right, Jake held up his cuffed hands in surrender. Let me think. He made a show of stroking his chin thoughtfully, mostly because he knew it annoyed Patwerp. First, my Swiss Army knife, the one my dad gave me. Patwerp consulted its datapad. Primitive Earth multi-tool, containing... Its antennae wiggled as it scrolled through the list. 17 different implements of varying utility. Approved, though I fail to see how it will help you survive Tartarus 9's flesh-dissolving acid storms. You would be surprised what you can do with a good can opener, Jake winked. Second item, my lucky Arizona Diamondbacks cap. A. Fabric head covering. Patwerp's antennae drooped in disbelief. Promoting an Earth sports team that, according to our records, hasn't won a championship in over 50 years. Hey, this could be their year, Jake protested. Besides, it's got sentimental value and UV protection. Against a planet with 3 suns that burn in the ultraviolet spectrum? Approved, if only because your death will be marginally more colorful. Patwerp's mandibles clicked in what might have been amusement. Final item? Jake grinned and reached into his back pocket, producing a battered paperback. Its cover was held on with what appeared to be space duct tape, and its pages were dog-eared to the point of being more corner than page. The Worst Dad Jokes in the Galaxy, Extended Edition, Patwerp read with growing horror. This is what you got exiled for in the first place. I know. Great, right? Figure if I'm going to die horribly, might as well have some quality reading material. Patwerp stared at him for a long moment, then stamped the book with perhaps more force than necessary. Approved. May whatever deities you believe in have mercy on your sense of humor. As the guards led Jake toward the teleportation chamber, he could hear Patwerp muttering something about humans and their inexplicable attachment to obsolete physical media. The chamber itself was impressive in that distinctly alien way that suggested its designers had never heard the phrase less is more. Okay. Crystalline spires pulsed with energy, arcs of lightning jumped between floating orbs, and in the center, a swirling vortex of what looked suspiciously like purple glitter waited to whisk Jake away to his doom. High Chancellor Zix Saz stood on an observation platform, tentacles clasped behind his back, in what he probably thought was a dignified pose. Any last words, human? Jake adjusted his baseball cap, tucked his book into his back pocket, and gripped his Swiss Army knife. Just one question, Zippy. What is it now? What do you call a planet with 1,000 deaths? Don't you dare. A grave situation. The last syllable stretched into infinity as the teleporter caught him, and Jake could have sworn he heard someone laughing, just before reality turned inside out. Jake materialized approximately 6 feet above the surface of Tartarus 9, which gave him just enough time to say, "Oh, come on," before gravity introduced itself. He landed face first in what appeared to be purple moss, which thankfully was softer than it looked. Less thankfully, it also giggled when he hit it. Jake made a mental note. Even the plants on this planet were weird. The first drop of acid rain hit his shoulder with a sizzle, burning a neat hole through his prison jumpsuit. Seriously? Jake scrambled to his feet, yanking off his baseball cap and holding it over his head, just as the downpour began in earnest. The acid pattered against the worn fabric, which somehow held up better than expected. Thank you, officially licensed MLB merchandise. Thunder crackled overhead, or at least Jake assumed it was thunder until he looked up and saw three suns playing what appeared to be a cosmic game of ping-pong with a moon. Right, three suns because one wasn't deadly enough. A screech echoed from somewhere in the purple moss forest behind him. It sounded like a cross between a velociraptor and a car alarm, which Jake figured was his cue to start running. He clutched his cap overhead and sprinted through the moss, which continued to giggle and occasionally tried to trip him. The screeching got closer. Jake's lungs burned. The air here was breathable but thick, like trying to inhale soup. His legs were starting to feel like lead, and the acid rain wasn't helping. He needed shelter fast. There, a cave entrance. Jake dove inside just as something large and toothy swooped past the opening. He rolled to his feet and skunny, pressed his back against the wall, and fumbled for his Swiss Army knife. Not that it would do much good against whatever that was, but it made him feel better. The creature landed at the cave entrance. In the purple-tinted light filtering through the acid rain, Jake could make out 6 serpentine heads on long, sinuous necks, attached to a body that looked like someone had tried to cross a dragon with a puppy and given up halfway through. All 6 heads were staring at him with what he really hoped wasn't hunger. So, Jake said, because if he was going to die, he was at least going to die talking. Come here often? The creature tilted all 6 heads in perfect synchronization. Then one of them opened its mouth and made a sound that was definitely not a screech. It was more like a whimper. Wait, are you lonely? All 6 heads nodded enthusiastically. You weren't hunting me, you were trying to make friends? More nodding. One head actually looked embarrassed. Jake lowered his knife and looked at the creature more carefully. Now that he wasn't running for his life, he could see that its eyes were more sad puppy than murder lizard, and its tail was definitely wagging. Tell you what, Jake said, reaching for his back pocket. Want to hear a joke? 6 pairs of eyes lit up. Jake pulled out his battered copy of The Worst Dad Jokes in the Galaxy and cleared his throat. Knock knock. One head tilted in confusion, while the others looked at each other, clearly unsure how to respond. This is the part where you say, "Who's there?" Jake demonstrated. Who's there? 6 voices boomed in unison, causing several stalactites to crack. Interrupting cow. Interrupting cow were, Moo! There was a moment of silence. Then all 6 heads burst out laughing, a sound like wind chimes in a hurricane. The creature rolled onto its back, all 6 necks twisting with mirth, its tail thumping against the cave floor hard enough to cause minor tremors. I think we're going to get along just fine, Jake grinned, watching as the creature tried to catch its breath. You know what you need? A name. How about Hydra Bob? The newly christened Hydra Bob's tail wagging intensified to seismic levels. All right, Bob, let me ask you something. Is there anywhere around here where the rain won't, dissolve me? Because this baseball cap really brings out my eyes, but it's not exactly a long-term solution. Hydra Bob jumped to its feet and gestured excitedly with all 6 heads toward the back of the cave. Jake could see now that it extended deeper into the mountain with what looked like bioluminescent fungi providing a surprisingly cozy atmosphere. Lead the way, buddy. But first, want to hear why the Scarecrow won an award? 6 heads nodded eagerly, because he was outstanding in his field. The resulting laughter caused an actual stalactite to crash down near the cave entrance. As Jake followed his new 6-headed friend deeper into the cave, he couldn't help but smile. Sure, this was supposed to be a death planet, but no one had said anything about it being boring. Hey Bob, what do you call a fake noodle? The acid rain continued to fall outside, but inside the cave, the sound of groaning laughter echoed through the tunnels. Somewhere in the Galactic Council chambers, High Chancellor Ziz felt his tentacles twitch involuntarily, as if sensing a disturbance in the cosmic order of dad jokes. Jake Martinez, it seemed, was just getting started. You know what this place needs? Jake stood back, admiring his handiwork with the Swiss Army knife saw blade. A proper sign. Can't have a death world paradise without proper branding. One of Hydra Bob's heads, the one Jake had nicknamed Grumpy, rolled its eyes while the others watched with interest as Jake carved into a slab of luminescent fungus wood. Casa de Martinez, he announced proudly, stepping back to reveal his carved masterpiece. Where death comes to die. The letters glowed a pleasant shade of blue in the cave's dim light. What do you think? Too much? Not enough? Jake tilted his head. Maybe we should add some flames, deadly flames. All 6 of Hydra Bob's heads shook in unison. They'd learned early on that encouraging Jake's artistic endeavors only led to more puns about deadly serious art. The cave system had turned out to be surprisingly accommodating once Jake got creative with his Swiss Army knife. The bioluminescent fungi provided both light and, after some careful experimentation, a decent building material once dried. The deeper chambers stayed a comfortable temperature despite the 3 suns outside, and the natural ventilation system kept the air fresh, if still soup-like in consistency. Jake pulled out his joke book and flipped to the back pages, which were now covered in his increasingly messy notes. Day 7. Acid rain dissolves everything except MLB merchandise. Theory: Earth sports gear is actually indestructible, we just never tested it properly. Note to self: start collection of deadly raindrops for future water feature. Day 12. Purple moss giggles when stepped on. Tries to trip you. Seems to do it more if you're taking yourself too seriously. Bob's grumpy head fell in it today, laughed so hard the other heads got hiccups. Day 15. Discovered why it's called Planet of 1,000 Deaths. Everything here is technically lethal, but only if you're a stuck-up space bureaucrat. Example: the flesh-melting acid rain only melts pretentious formal robes, regular clothes are fine. He added a new entry, Day 20. Working theory: this planet isn't deadly, it just has a really specific sense of humor. Everything here seems designed to target exactly the kind of uptight, serious species that make up the Council. No wonder they're terrified of it. Hey, Bob, Jake called out, an idea forming. Remember that crystal formation we found yesterday? The one that supposedly drives people insane with its maddening geometries? All 6 heads perked up with interest. What if it's not actually driving anyone insane? What if it's just telling really bad math jokes? Bob's heads all tilted in consideration. Then the smartest one, Jake called it nerd, made a series of complicated gestures with its neck. You're right, Jake snapped his fingers. That's why only the Council species go crazy around it. They're too serious to handle a good calculus pun. Watch this. Jake approached the crystal formation that jutted from one wall of their cave. Its angles did seem to shift unnaturally, and there was definitely a faint humming that sounded almost like, "Why was 6 afraid of 7?" Jake asked the crystal. The humming changed pitch slightly. "Because 7, 8, 9. The crystal's surfaces rippled, and the humming transformed into what was unmistakably a chuckle. The angles shifted into what could only be described as a more relaxed geometry. Jake grinned and pulled out his joke book again. Day 20 continued. Confirmed. Even the rocks here are comedians. Beginning to suspect Tartarus 9 isn't a death planet at all. It's a planet-sized comedy club with very specific taste in audience members. Bob, Jake called out, already reaching for his Swiss Army knife again. I've got an idea for the entrance hall. How do you feel about turning that cluster of soul-destroying crystals into a disco ball? All 6 of Bob's heads grinned, showing an impressive array of teeth that somehow managed to look more excited than threatening. First, though, Jake held up his joke book. What did the 0 say to the 8? The crystal formation leaned in slightly, its angles shifting with interest. Nice belt. The resulting crystalline laughter caused a small avalanche of gemstones, each one containing what appeared to be an infinite recursion of knock-knock jokes. Jake picked one up, adding it to his growing collection of deadly souvenirs. At this rate, he was going to need a bigger joke book for all his notes. Or maybe, "Hey Bob, how do you feel about starting a travel blog?" "Well, this explains a lot," Jake muttered, examining the remains of what appeared to be a previous exiles camp. Hydra Bob's heads peered over his shoulders with varying degrees of interest. Nerd was fascinated, Grumpy looked bored, and the other 4 were playing an impromptu game of rock, paper, scissors. The camp was perfectly preserved, almost museum-like in its organization. Everything was categorized, labeled, and arranged with meticulous precision. The exile's journal lay open on a perfectly straight desk made from perfectly cut crystal, containing perfectly written observations about perfectly terrible days. Day 45. Nothing of note occurred. Again. Conducted standard safety protocols. Again. Observed local wildlife from secure distance. Again. Beginning to suspect greatest threat on Tartarus 9 is chronic ennui. Day 46. Attempted to classify local species by threat level. All seem equally lethal. Updated spreadsheet accordingly. Considered telling a joke to pass the time. Decided against it. Standards must be maintained even in exile. Day 47. The silence is deafening. The wildlife appears to be avoiding me. Perhaps they sense my profound dignity in the face of adversity. Or perhaps they're just as bored as I am. Final entry. Cannot continue. The monotony is unbearable. Even the acid rain falls in a predictable pattern. I go now to seek a more exciting demise. Perhaps I will volunteer to organize the moss alphabetically. They didn't die from the dangers, Jake realized, flipping through page after page of increasingly desperate attempts to maintain order in the face of cosmic chaos. They died from taking everything too seriously. Hydra Bob's nerd head made a series of complicated gestures that somehow conveyed both agreement and mathematical proof. You know what this place needs? Jake grinned, pulling out his Swiss Army knife. A renovation show makeover montage. The next few weeks passed in a blur of activity that would have given any respectable member of the Galactic Council an aneurysm. Jake turned the acid rain collection system into a musical fountain by arranging the collection bowls at different heights. The rain hitting them created a surprisingly catchy beat, which only got better when he taught the local wildlife to beatbox along. The crystal formations that had driven previous exiles mad with their incomprehensible geometries turned out to be excellent amplifiers for knock-knock jokes. Jake arranged them in a natural amphitheater pattern, creating what he called the comedy grotto. Even the deadly predators got in on the act. Jake started holding daily joke sessions in the clearing outside Casa de Martinez, and soon the air was filled with a cacophony of various species attempting to mimic his laugh. The results ranged from adorably awful to genuinely concerning, but everyone seemed to be having fun. "Why did the cookie go to the doctor?" Jake called out to his assembled audience one morning. The gathered creatures leaned forward expectantly. A pack of what looked like furry velociraptors tilted their heads in unison. Something with too many eyes blinked them all in sequence, because it was feeling crumbly. The resulting explosion of alien laughter shook leaves from trees and caused several small avalanches. The velociraptors fell over themselves giggling, the many-eyed thing's eyes rolled in what appeared to be joy, and even the acid rain seemed to fall in rhythm with the general merriment. Hydra Bob's heads were all laughing in different keys, creating an oddly harmonious chord. Jake had started calling them his backup singers. Okay, one more." Jake pulled out his joke book, which was now so stuffed with notes and observations that it had developed its own gravitational field. "What do you call a bear with no teeth?" The audience waited, quivering with anticipation. Even the purple moss leaned in to listen. "A gummy bear." This time, the laughter was loud enough to register on seismic sensors in the next star system. The acid rain fell in perfect comedic timing, like nature's own rimshot. Later that evening, as Jake sat outside Casa de Martinez, watching all three suns set in what he had to admit was a pretty spectacular display of cosmic one-upmanship, he made a final entry in his joke book. Day 75. Beginning to suspect I wasn't actually sentenced to exile. Pretty sure I just accidentally became the first human to open a comedy club in hell. Reviews are pretty good so far, though the critics are a bit bitey. P.S. Note to self, need to work on the velociraptors' timing. Their punchlines keep eating the audience. The Galactic Council's inspection probe was state-of-the-art, designed to operate in the most hostile environments imaginable. Its makers had hardened it against acid, radiation, extreme temperatures, and even bad poetry. They hadn't prepared it for a conga line. And here we have our world-famous acid geysers. Hydra Bob's tour guide head, wearing a tiny name tag that read, "Hi, I'm Gary," announced to a line of various deadly creatures dancing past the probe's cameras. Notice how the naturally occurring mineral content creates a perfect exfoliating spray. Our spa treatments are to die for. But don't worry, that's just a figure of speech these days. The probe's AI tried to process what it was seeing. According to its databanks, it should have been documenting the remains of Jake Martinez, not watching a six-headed tour guide lead a choreographed dance number while making spa puns. "Bob," Jake's voice called from off-camera, "is that the inspection probe? Bring it over to the Death Metal Comedy Club. We're about to start the lunch show." The probe found itself being gently but firmly guided by several of Hydra Bob's heads toward what appeared to be a massive structure made entirely of the planet's deadliest metals. The entrance sign flickered, with bioluminescent fungi spelling out "Live Laughs" or "Die Trying" in a font that somehow managed to be both threatening and welcoming. Inside, the probe's sensors were immediately overwhelmed. The walls themselves seemed to pulse with crystalline energy, each facet containing trapped jokes that had achieved critical mass. The stage was made from reformed acid rain crystals that caught and amplified every sound. The ceiling dripped with carefully controlled streams of acid rain that created a constantly shifting light show. And everywhere there were creatures. Creatures that, according to the probe's database, should have been trying to eat each other. Instead, they were sharing tables, ordering drinks, heckling. "Ladies, gentlemen, and unclassifiable horrors," Jake's voice boomed through the crystal amplification system. He stood on stage wearing what appeared to be a tuxedo made from protective fungi and his ever-present baseball cap. "Welcome to another edition of Extreme Survival Stand-Up, where the jokes are deadly, but the delivery is worse." The crowd roared with laughter. The probe's microphones picked up at least 30 different species of laugh, all somehow harmonizing. Tonight's show features our resident acid rain dance troupe, the Deadly Drips, followed by our house band. Give it up for Hydra Bob and the backup heads. 5 of Hydra Bob's heads launched into a surprisingly catchy melody, while the 6th, wearing sunglasses, played what appeared to be a guitar made from crystallized jokes. The probe dutifully recorded everything, its AI growing increasingly confused. According to its programming, it should have been documenting evidence of Jake Martinez's gruesome demise. Instead, it was recording what appeared to be the galaxy's most successful entertainment venture. And then its cameras picked up something that caused its circuits to literally double-take. There, in the back row, poorly disguised in a trench coat and fake mustache, sat High Chancellor Zix Zzz. And he was laughing. No, not just laughing, crying with laughter, all his tentacles clutching tissues as Jake launched into a bit about the relative merits of acid rain versus regular rain for maintaining proper tentacle moisture. The probe's footage went viral approximately 2.3 seconds after it transmitted back to the council chambers. Within hours, Tartarus 9 had become the galaxy's hottest tourist destination. The booking system crashed 6 times from the overflow of reservation requests. Travel blogs exploded with reviews. "The acid rain spa treatment left my carapace gleaming. 5 stars. Happy customer. Species redacted. The deadly predator petting zoo is amazing. They only try to eat you if you don't laugh at their jokes. Definitely not a council member. Best vacation ever. The Try Not to Die Laughing Challenge should carry a warning though. I actually split 3 of my sides." Totally not, High Chancellor Zix. Back in the Death Metal Comedy Club, Jake was just finishing his set. "So I said to the Crystal Formation, why don't you tell better jokes?" And it said it was afraid they wouldn't reflect well on him. "Thank you. You've been a terrifyingly wonderful audience." As the crowd roared, Jake spotted a familiar figure trying to slip out unnoticed. "Hey, Zippy," he called out. "Your mustache is slipping." High Chancellor Zix froze, then slowly turned around. For a moment, the club went quiet. Then one of his tentacles reached up, straightened his fake mustache with great dignity, and asked, "What do you call a planet that turns from certain death to standing room only?" Jake grinned. "I don't know what." "A grave situation. That got better." The resulting laughter shook the entire planet, and somewhere in the Galactic Council chambers, a very confused bureaucrat had to file the first-ever paperwork for reclassifying a death world as an entertainment district. In his private notes, Jake made one final entry. Day 180. Successfully turned hell into a holiday destination. Not bad for a guy with a Swiss Army knife, a baseball cap, and a bad joke book. Wonder if they'll let me franchise. By the power vested in me by the Galactic Council of Prudent Species, High Chancellor Zix announced, his tentacles adorned with formal ribbons, I hereby declare Tartarus 9 an official cultural landmark of galactic significance, and recognize Jake Martinez as our first ambassador of astronomical entertainment. The assembled crowd, a mix of deadly predators, cosmic horrors, and increasingly less prudent species, erupted in applause. Several crystalline formations shattered from sheer joy, only to reform into more festive shapes. Jake, wearing a formal tuxedo made from protective fungi and his trusty, if slightly acid-stained, Diamondback's cap, stepped up to the floating podium. Thanks, Zippy. You know, when you first sentenced me to death by planet, I didn't expect to end up with a job title longer than my criminal record. Yes, well, Zix's tentacles fidgeted with what might have been embarrassment. We may have been a bit hasty in our judgment. Hasty? You threw me into literal hell for telling dad jokes. And you turned it into a resort with a 4-star rating. Would have been 5 stars, but the acid rain keeps dissolving the review tablets. The crowd laughed, and Jake couldn't help but notice how much more relaxed everyone looked these days. Even the council members had started wearing less formal robes, though that might have been because the acid rain kept dissolving the fancy ones. 6 months after the infamous probe incident, Tartarus 9 had become the galaxy's hottest destination in more ways than one. The Galactic Comedy Academy, motto Learn or Die Laughing, had just opened its doors, with a curriculum that included advanced punchline timing for multiple heads and surviving your first heckler, literally. Jake looked out over the graduation ceremony for the Academy's first class. In the front row, a group of furry velociraptors wore tiny mortarboard caps at jaunty angles. Behind them, something with too many eyes blinked them in sequence to practice its timing. Even the purple moss had enrolled, though it kept giggling during the quiet parts of lectures. And there, in the back, High Chancellor Ziz was practicing his own routine. He'd started doing open mic nights on weekends, and his Tales from the Council Chambers bit was becoming surprisingly popular. Turned out all those years of keeping a straight face during diplomatic meetings had given him perfect deadpan delivery. As your graduation speaker, Jake continued, adjusting his cap, I'm supposed to give you some words of wisdom. So here it is. Never let anyone tell you something's impossible just because it might kill you. I mean, look at us. We turned the deadliest planet in the galaxy into a comedy club, and the only thing that died was our sense of self-importance. Hydra Bob's heads all nodded in agreement, each wearing a different style of graduation cap. The head, formerly known as Grumpy, now going by Chuckles, was actually smiling. You're all about to go out there and spread laughter across the galaxy. Some of you will tell jokes that could level small moons. Others will perform physical comedy that technically counts as a weapon of mass destruction. And at least one of you will try to organize an improv group, which is still technically a crime in 3 sectors. The Velociraptor Improved Troop tried to look innocent and failed spectacularly. But remember this, when they sentenced me to this planet, they expected me to die. Instead, I turned death into a punchline, and now look at us. We've got council members doing stand-up, predators learning slapstick, and an acid rain fountain that does rim shots. Jake grinned, looking out over his improbable audience. And that's how you turn a death sentence into a punchline. But seriously, folks, tip your waitresses, especially the ones with tentacles. They've got a lot of mouths to feed, and some of them are in places you really don't want to know about. The laughter that followed could be heard all the way to the council chambers, where a very busy bureaucrat was processing paperwork to reclassify Death World Survival as a performing art.